Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar called Uncovering Our Blind Spots. Today is September 24th, and today we are, of course, covering some HR-related topics with Deborah Jeffries today. My name is Christian Boyd, and I will be your moderator for today. First off, before we begin, I would like to state if you do have any questions, you can refer to the question box on the right-hand side or the GoToWebinar application, in which case you can type it in, and I will make sure it gets to Deborah during the presentation. That being said, if you do have a more personal take or a more personal question, you can also email them to either Deborah or I. My email is memberservices@sdao.com, and we can maybe make sure those emails or personal questions can get to the right place. With that being said, let me turn it over to Deborah Jeffries herself, and she will take you throughout the rest of the presentation.
Great. Thank you. And good morning, everybody. Glad that you're here. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Deborah Jeffries. I do work at HR Answers, where I've worked for the last 31 years. And HR Answers and SDAO have had a long working relationship. And most of my responsibilities within the organization outside of kind of helping to run the joint is on the educational side of things. So I spend a great deal of my time doing training and working usually on site. And so the last several months plus has really altered some of that activity. So you can see on the screen, these are some of my passions, obsessions, maybe even addictions, as well as some family members that are important to me. And many of you probably can relate to having a school year that didn't quite go as planned. And so we finally officially had the graduation in August, even an in-person bit of that. So we are grateful for that. And of course, it's changed his entire look and outlook and activities about where he's going in the future, which has really helped me on being able to see things in a different light, which even kind of pertains to our conversation today. I'm not sure if you're familiar with HR Answers at all or not, but we're a 35-year-old firm here in Oregon, and Judy Clark is our founder and owner of the operation. And many of you, I'm guessing, probably do know about HR Answers and have the HR support services. So just a reminder that those are available to you as a member, usually running through the SDIS program. And so I would encourage you, if you are hearing about this for the first time, let us know, let member services know, so that we can get you connected with unlimited phone consultation on all things HR, plus a whole lot of other services. But it's part of your membership, so please do take advantage of that. When it comes to our topic and understanding a little bit about unconscious bias, that's my hope, is that I bring a little bit of awareness, maybe some thoughtfulness to our conversation today. And when I say that, self-reflection, thoughtfulness, taking it back, and how does it apply inside our organizations? How does it apply to you as an individual? So let's get started. So I put some information here to kind of give us a feel for where. Let's have a kind of a baseline of some definitions, information that that I think will be helpful to people. Whoops, my apologies. That's what happens when you start getting trigger happy with your fingers. When we talk about biases, right? Preferences, we all have them. I was having some ice cream last night. Well, I have preferences on the brands that I eat or the flavors that I have. But the idea is making sure that we're thoughtful about whether or not that's going to impact our impartiality. When we talk about prejudice, it's normal, it's human to have prejudices. And these are strong feelings about a person, a group of people, a particular subject. But what often happens is that prejudices doesn't necessarily always mean we're conscious of them, that we make decisions or we take pieces of information and we apply it. And so being able to be thoughtful about that. And when we talk about stereotyping, that's really making assumptions about an individual, about a situation, about a group of people. And we just apply it to everything, that all women do this or all men do that, or that all ice cream is bad for you. Being able to be thoughtful, because when we generalize, when we stereotype, we're lumping everybody in. And I will tell you a good example that I hear in class on an ongoing basis is, why does everybody think that millennial is a bad word? And there are millennials that are out there saying, I'm not like, quote, them. That's not who I am. So we got to be really careful about the kind of the always and the nevers, the alls, the everybody's. Those are important because it isn't always true. So when we talk a little bit more about what's unconscious bias, one of the things that I want us to be thoughtful about is making sure that we're kind of on the same page about the conversation. So implicit bias is also kind of how we define it: positive or negative attitude about something, your thoughts, your beliefs, your opinions about something that you hold. And you may not even know that you hold it. And some of that comes from background, how you grew up, where you grew up, the people who were around you, the beliefs that they held. And so these are kind of tendencies, inclinations that then affect our understandings, that impact our actions. And really, the outcome is then our decisions that we form, that we make based on those beliefs and understandings. And then, quote, our conscious awareness. And they kind of just happen. We just do it. You can, if you've had an opportunity to travel and you've been reading up on a culture or on a community or a state or a country, based on what you were reading, you form some opinions and then you start acting on those. So when it becomes kind of spontaneous judgments, when it becomes things that we're using from our past experiences, our background, our exposure to media of all sorts. I remember once when I traveled to New York, I was on the subway, and we've all heard stories about the New York subway. And while I was on it, it was the first time I got on, and I was in very tight spaces, and some gentleman walked by me, elbow up, and clocked me right in the chin. And I was like, I'm having one of those New York experiences. I just got hit in the face by some guy. And was it on purpose? Was it accidental? Now you could have that first experience and say, never doing that again. Or you say, okay, what was that? How was that? Was that a thing? Was that not a thing? So being thoughtful, because my first inclination could have been New Yorkers. Well, then there's that generalization. There's making assumptions, right? That's stereotyping. And that's not what we're trying to do. But what we have to do is kind of interrupt ourselves in the middle of those, because those preferences and prejudices that we have, they're usually hidden away. We don't always know that they're there, but they do influence every decision that we make. And when we talk about the workplace, decisions about our coworkers, decisions about policies that we make, decisions about how we're going to word something, how we're going to present it to the community, all kinds of influences can be taking place. So just ask you to kind of be thoughtful about unconscious level means you're not always aware of it. And our job is to interrupt that process. And so that's something that I kind of want us to talk about, is how can we interrupt that? So first and foremost, you're not alone when these things happen. If you can name it, there's probably some kind of unconscious bias for it. And I'll give you an example here. Research has suggested that there's over 150 of them already, right? I'm going to probe a little bit here and tell you that it's all in the brain and that we can do something about that. I already told you that we're all in the same boat. And when we talk about the brain, we really are talking about mental shortcuts. And to be perfectly honest with you, and you'll see it in a future slide or two, our brains are lazy, which albeit means that perhaps we are lazy. We take a lot of shortcuts. If you think about it from this perspective, when you're getting in the car and you drive the same, like if you're going to the grocery store or the bank, or I hop on I-5, I live in Salem and our office is in Tigard. So I hop on I-5 and I go to work the same way every day. You know that thought when you're like, how did I get here so fast? I wasn't even, quote, paying attention. It's all those mental shortcuts. You're kind of like on autopilot. And that's why we have to interrupt ourselves. And quite frankly, when we talk about in our brains, the mental capacity in terms of what we're doing, mental grouping of things together for those shortcuts, it's really a kind of a survival mechanism. We're hardwired to do that, believe it or not. And so we have these neural pathways that we keep creating. And so if things keep getting reinforced and reinforced, and we keep doing it the same way, then it's comfortable. We understand it. It doesn't need questioning, so to speak. So here's the question that I have for you. And I would encourage you to go ahead and use the chat box to be able to provide some answers. Because when we talk about different kinds of biases, I want to know whether or not you're willing to admit that you've had any of these. So take a look, see if you can use the chat box and put some notations in there, and let me know which ones you've experienced. And Christian, you might have to tell me whether or not people are actually putting notes in there. I don't see anything at the moment. I
So
know it's supposed to be kind of for questions.
yes.
And maybe some of these might be new to you and you don't know. So some ones that tend to pop up for people when we think about the normative bias just means this is normal to me. Someone is normal. They're acting like they're supposed to. The performance one, I think we can tie to a workplace. This is usually when we talk about somebody has usually it's used from an experimental standpoint in terms of a group or subjects in an experiment, and we're paying attention to certain things. But the idea is that, let's say, for example, employees know when their performance review is coming up. Well, they start behaving a certain way because they know something's going to happen. They know that people are watching. So it's kind of like they know which group they're in. They know that people are watching. They know that they need to act a certain way. So we call that kind of a performance bias, and that we tend to look for certain things, and that when we see it, we recognize it. And we might be recognizing some people more than others. And so you have to take a look at yourself. Am I recognizing and praising men more than women for the same kind of actions and behaviors? What does that look like? And quite frankly, the individual, the employee, the coworker, the community can change their responses or their behavior because they know they're being watched or listened to or paid attention or something. Kind of like you sit up straighter when certain people walk by. Okay. So when we talk about performance or attribution bias, that's being able to, again, evaluate people or try and find reasons for their behaviors. We're trying to associate something with that. When you talk about infinity bias, we tend to want to get along with people who are most like us. We gravitate towards people who look like us, sound like us, have the same backgrounds or beliefs as us. Or we might actually then avoid people who are kind of like us. When you talk about the halo effect or the horn effect, we usually talk about those things in an interviewing process. Someone said something wonderful, and we're like, oh, that's great, that's a good answer. And it overshadows everything else that we do. Same with the opposite effect with the horn effect. Somebody said something that set us off, that rubbed us the wrong way, and we're like, I'm not interested in that person. I'm not liking that. So being able to be thoughtful about, these are all biases that we can have. So when we talk about applying it to the workplace, when we're interviewing people, when you're looking at a resume, when you meet somebody for the first time, when somebody comes into the office and wants to talk, a community member. So we have to be thoughtful about, where are our biases. I know when I do recruiting, I have a bias. I'm a little old fashioned. I like when people have a resume, they put it on great looking paper, they sent it in the mail, they wrote a cover letter so that I could pay attention to that. I know that technology is here. I know that it makes life easier to cut, paste, copy, send. But you know what? That's also an easy way for me to see that you didn't maybe care as much about the application process, or you didn't really read the full job announcement because I asked you to ask a question, or you didn't put in a cover letter and I asked for one. So it's being able to be thoughtful. Would I not hire somebody? Maybe not. But if you can't follow directions, that's probably something that's important in the workplace. So be able to know what your biases are, and then how do we filter through some of those? What does that look like? How important are things in the workplace? So quite frankly, so that we aren't doing anything that's going to be considered discriminatory, because that's where it gets us into trouble, right? Okay, so let's next slide. So when it kind of can show up for us is perception of how people see us and perceive us versus kind of reality. You can make judgments. What's that phrase? You can judge a book by its cover is something that could be at play here. When we talk about attitudes, how we react towards certain people, certain statements, groupings of people, behaviors within groups of people, which gives us to the next block, behaviors. And are we receptive to that, or does it turn us off? What things do we pay most attention to? What gets our ear? What gets our attention? What will we spend more time listening to or engaging with? When we talk about certain words that people might say, I would suggest that in this time of COVID and working remotely for so many people, that clarity of communication, the words that we use, because we're not able to see as much in the body language, has a lot to do with how people then are perceiving. I was sharing with someone the other day that I was on a Zoom call earlier this week, and I was really, really surprised at how many people were the way they were dressed, the makeup they didn't have on, the hair that they hadn't combed. And this was a networking social event. And if we had been in person, I promise you, they wouldn't have been looking like that. And so then that brings me to those micro affirmations from the standpoint of what was going on in my head, expectations about how somebody should be looking, should be behaving, right? Did that give me comfort? Did that give me pause for thought? And then how do I react to that? What thought processes or decisions do I have? So it's important to pay attention. Why are you thinking what you're thinking? Why are you feeling what you're feeling in the moment? Where's that coming from in some fashion or another? So we need to be able to kind of, for lack of better terminology, exercise our unconscious. And exercise means paying attention to what you're doing in the moment. Why do you do it that way? How many of you have ever done that exercise where, and maybe it's even just verbally, but you have to describe how you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Well, for a lot of us, you just do it. But you have to talk about every step of picking up the knife in your right hand or your left hand, unscrewing the peanut butter jar to a certain direction, putting the lid down, putting the knife in, getting a healthy scoop, putting it on the you just do it because you're comfortable with it, right? So sometimes our visuals can have an impact. So when we think about, if you looked at these two tables, do you think one is bigger than the other? Are they the same, or are they not the same shape at all? Now, I would really like to see if you say, put in an answer in the question box and say A, B, or C. And this is when I miss being in person because I can't see faces or raised hands and be able to say, hey, I can see that. And what is that? And look at the group and see what group consensus even thinks, because some people will wait till other people answer to form their own conclusions about things. So believe it or not, if you were to take a ruler and you were on the right-hand side of the first table and you measured that up against the second table, the first line on the second table, you would notice that it's actually 2 3/4 inches. It looks like one is bigger, but they aren't. You would say, obviously, they're not the same shape. Well, one seems to be more narrow and longer. So that's one of those things, is that what we see sometimes can be deceiving. This particular picture was created by a gentleman by the name of Roger Shepard. He's an Oxford and Stanford University professor. And we've all seen these kind of illustrations before. But bottom line is we make assumptions. We make determinations about what we perceive as real. And we make then decisions. And on an average day, we make like 11 million. We sort out 11 million pieces of information and we make decisions based on that. What's then becomes real to us? Only do we kind of occasionally realize that something is subjective. So again, you can't judge a book by its cover. You can't judge somebody the second they walk in. You can't judge somebody on one statement that they make because you don't know them yet. You don't know everything there is to know in terms of the background. So when we apply that to your work decisions, work-related activities, I want you to think back to, where have I jumped to conclusions? Where have I maybe not paid attention to all the clues? What's been happening there in some fashion or another? So there are kind of three examples of unconscious bias when we think about perhaps that could happen in the workplace. And I mean, there's tons of them, but when we think about if I assigned a project to somebody, why did I assign that to them? Who was the best choice? Why did I think that it was? So if it was a technical project or had some technical technology elements to it, would we assume that a Gen Yer, a millennial, even a Gen Z, and Gen Z is in our workplaces, they are about, depending on who you listen to, between the ages of 18 to 20-ish, and they're in our workplaces. Maybe you wouldn't choose a baby boomer if it was a technology related scenario, right? So when we think about resumes, and there have been studies when you give identical resumes to managers and we leave off the names on one versus leaving the names on another, do the decisions become different based on purely a name that we're reading? That we make some assumptions that we know the culture or a background or maybe even potentially religious belief based on a name, the heritage of the name. So being able to be thoughtful about those kinds of things. There was when YouTube launched in their app, 5 to 10% of the videos were loaded upside down. And the Google engineers were trying to figure out what happened. Well, they inadvertently designed the app for right-handed users because they just assumed everybody kind of was, because the majority of people are. That's the kind of thing that you have to be thoughtful of. And if you've got a group of people who are all, quote, right-handers, they're not even perhaps going to think about that. So that's why we talk about, who are your committees? Who's your task force members? Have we got every generation represented? When we hire new people, are we being thoughtful about casting a wider net? And granted, some of your communities are not large, but are we trying to expand that reach in some fashion or another? So think about the broader implications that we are making in terms of decisions or policy or protocol or something, and we aren't opening up as wide as we could. We're not inviting more people to evaluate us or to review what we did to see whether or not it has any adverse impact on any groups of people, or did we think about things all the way through? Did we miss something? Can someone else see that? Someone who's maybe more detail oriented, because we don't want to step in it if we don't have to. We don't want to do something that's going to be detrimental. So my question to you kind of is, then what does that mean for your workplace, right? And this is where, Christian, I don't know whether or not we have any questions or people can put a notation. What might this mean for people's workplaces in terms of observations or impacts that it might have had, or things that you can relate to right now that you would go back and you might do a little bit differently? Is someone able to share there for us? The dreaded silence treatment. well, I'm not sure that people are writing anything because I'm not seeing anything, but here's some things that I think can be true for some of us. Um, the judgments that we form around individuals, peers, um, people that we work with, people who supply services to us, right? Um, based on our stereotypes, based on our experience in the past of working with or talking to somebody, that again, individual behavior, what does that look like or sound like, and how it's impacting us? Effective interaction with coworkers, making sure that we are as effective and clear as we can be with folks, and how does that impact outcomes for other people? So I think some of those things can be at play for individuals, and inside our workplaces. There's a statement in terms of what does this look like, for people and activities. And so this particular individual, who has done a great deal of research and has written some papers. Um, Microaggressions are little acts or little behaviors, little statements that people can make, that might seem like commonplace daily interactions, bantering with each other, but really have an element of a little bit of an indignity to it. You're compromising someone's integrity. It doesn't usually necessarily have to be intentional. It can be very unintentional, um, but it's something that's derogatory. It's something that's negative. It's something that's demeaning. It's a slight. It's an insult, and they're usually kind of like maybe mumbled under your breath. It's something that you say when someone walks away. It's a note that you're writing on a piece of paper in a meeting and you show it to somebody else. Um, and I'm not saying that all comments would be negative. I am suggesting though that we don't share maybe our discomfort about something that someone said, or we don't ask for clarity. We don't ask for understanding or confirmation. To Can you say that a different way, or can you give me a different example of something? And so we take it kind of at face value, and then again we make assumptions about something. We then form opinions and make actions and decisions based on that. And it reinforces perhaps not the message that was really being said. So if I could provide you with a little bit of a visual, I remember when my brother and I were young, we would go out to pancakes with my family, and then we'd get the dollar pancakes and you got like 10 of them. Well, my brother and I would sit there and kind of play with our food, and we would stack the little dollar pancakes on top of each other and see if we could get them before they would fall over. Now, depending on where you went, dollar pancakes were either kind of small or sometimes they were a little bit on the larger size. Um, and so that's how I think of microaggressions: little statements, little comments, little behaviors that stack on top of each other. And after a period of time, it's going to fall over, it's going to tip over. So it's going to be one too many statements. And someone all of a sudden is going to go, why do you always say that? Why do you always use that? Why do you do that around me, but you don't do that around anybody else? So there's something that's there. And we usually try and laugh it off. We usually try and make a joke out of it. Well, that's where the hurt comes in. And we need to be thoughtful about that. Now, kind of going one step further, there's been a lot of conversation, a lot of challenges with racial injustice, being able to be thoughtful about people of all color and how we're treated. And when we talk about taking a look back at yourself, your own history, your own experiences, and since I don't know who's all on the program today, I don't know anything about you. I don't know your backgrounds or anything like that. And I can't even make any judgments because I can't see anything. Um, I will just give you an example or two of quote my experiences. But when we talk about privilege, that's something we've heard a lot about, and we could talk about the quote white experience, right? Inherent advantages possessed by people, based on their race, characteristics of their racial um, profile, and then characterized by inequality or injustice. And typically the overarching conversation, let's just be straightforward, has been kind of the white experience, the white privilege, the white, and that can set people off. That can make some of you uncomfortable just by the sheer fact that I've referenced that. But oftentimes we talk about quotes in terms of people sharing, I've been taught growing up uh, in a predominantly white environment, growing up in Oregon. I did spend 7 years in California as a young person, a very young person. Um, but oftentimes when we talk about racism, it puts other people, quote, a disadvantage, and not necessarily to be seen as what's then been my advantage. And so when I think about those kinds of scenarios, I think that we can talk a little bit about what could that look like, if I well, let me back up a second. If we talk about the different kinds of privileges that perhaps people have had, there's a professor, associate director at Wellesley College. Her name's Peggy McIntosh. And so she put together she wrote a book, and she had a paper, and she called the paper Working Paper 189 was the name. And she was realizing and trying to work from, it was a male perspective, and unacknowledged privileges that have presented themselves. And so if I said, I've had the privilege of living in an environment where I don't truly understand the dire state of racism today. Could we say yes or no to that? I've been privileged to not be insulted by my color of my skin. I've had the privilege of escaping violent stereotypes associated with my race. I would have to say yes. I've had the privilege of attending a school that was a private college. It had quite a bit of diversity, but from a percentage standpoint, no. So we could go on and on and on about what privileges I've been afforded, what opportunities I've had because of my background, because of my education, because of certain events or activities or people that I met, knew, or participated in. And so being able to really look at that from your own self. So when I talk about trying to have an opportunity for self-reflection, this is it. When I say take a hard look in the mirror, this is it. What have you had the opportunity? What's been afforded to you that may not be afforded to others? And being able to say, you don't know what my experience has been. You don't know how I grew up. I would tell you that if you met me or you knew me, and where I sit today in my life, you wouldn't know that after a few months of being born, the apartment that my family lived in burned to the ground, and that we were then homeless and we had to find someplace else. You wouldn't know that my dad got transferred to California, which is why we moved there, and that we weren't actually supposed to be transferred, but we lived down there for 7 years, and we lived hand to mouth. I remember part of my upbringing being pasta, 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 because it lasted a long time. I would tell you that part of my quote white experience was the element of driving around in a Pinto. Two-door car with the four of us, and we would go collecting cans and bottles just to pay for one night out of eating because we had no extra money. I remember my mom telling me, no, we can't go into that store. It's too expensive. You don't know where people have been. You don't know what experiences they've had. You can't say and look at somebody and say, you know, that you get, that you understand, that you've been there, that you understand how they feel, if you really haven't been in that spot. So I want you to be thoughtful about what opportunities have been afforded to you, understanding that that in itself is a privilege. Other people necessarily haven't had those. And what does that look like? When we couple that all into the workplace, what do we need to be thoughtful about? What do we need to be aware of? When we talk about unpacking our history, I can tell you that When I was in college, I dated a person of color. I didn't think anything of it at the time until we were walking around the city of downtown Salem on a Sunday evening and the city is closed down and everybody in the city in terms of in their cars, I turned and said, "Wayne, why is everybody looking at us?" And he was like, "Are you kidding me? It wasn't in my purview." And why wasn't it? I don't even know. It should have been something to be more aware of. But that was a first experience to really pay attention. We're being different. This is, quote, not normal. Why is that true? Why does it have to be true? So, again, you never know what experiences people have had. And what does that look like? And what does that mean for you as an individual? What does that mean for your workplace? What does that mean for your communities? So, unconscious bias is not always bad. It isn't. Again, it's been a mental shortcut that we make for ourselves. It's a mechanism of survival. It gets us through the day. It helps us spend less energy on things so that we can hopefully spend more important time and energy on things that matter, that perhaps are important or urgent, depending on the kind of situation that we find ourselves in our workplaces. So when I told you it was all in the brain and how we operate and what does that look like and what does that mean, um, our brains want to be around other people. That's one of the things about COVID that has been kind of challenging. We are social beings. We like being around others. We like the connection. Now, some of us are introverts and we might not like as much of that interaction, right? But we have a high value to be cared for, to be needed, to be appreciated. We want to make contributions to things. We have a strong sense of wanting to belong, to fit in, to connect. And when those things are compromised, when those things are in question, when we aren't feeling that, it impacts us in a variety of ways. And so we really don't like ambiguity. That's one of the things that then when we talk about making changes, that seems scary or that's different. So we kind of like structure. We like guidelines. We might say we don't. Teenagers say they don't like rules, but rules tell teenagers that their parents care about them. Well, it's the same way in terms of a workplace. We really are saying that we care about you. You're important to us. This matters. So our brains prefer to have reasons to why we want to do things, why we want to hang out with certain people. And again, I mentioned earlier that our brains tend to be lazy, and we're trying to be efficient as we possibly can to, again, conserve that energy. And quite frankly, this is the mother of all biases. When something is new, it takes more energy because it's, versus something that's familiar to us. Something that's familiar to us is our comfort zone. And so by sharing some observations and comments with you, maybe I've pushed you outside your comfort zone. Something you said, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to go there. That's in that moment when you have to capture it and say, what is it about that situation, that set of words, this person that is causing me to be outside my comfort zone? Because to be perfectly honest with you, as someone who trains and works with others, when you're outside your comfort zone is when you're learning the most. When you're learning the most is when you're not in your comfort zone. And so being able to take more advantage of that and capitalize on that. So when we talk about a challenging concept, some people would say, and it's a little challenging for someone like myself, training versus education. Unconscious bias training is a waste of time. Well, I think it depends on your definition of training versus education versus awareness. When you're doing something like this that we're doing, you're attending, we're not really interacting. This is sharing information. This is sharing concepts with you, and then we hope that you take it back and do something with it. Training means it's ongoing. It isn't stopping. It's persistent. It's regular. It's like going to the gym, right? If you go to the gym and you work out every day, you're going to start seeing some results. Now, that doesn't mean you might not hit a plateau, but you're going to be seeing some things differently. Well, That's like training and awareness. It's only as good as the amount of time and energy you put into something. So keep educating ourselves. So when we practice it on a regular basis, when we are creating new pathways of information, so that we don't have mindless tendencies, those become the habits. Those become the patterns. Those become the laziness that we fall into. And it doesn't have to be around this concept. Think about just interactions or living at home. Where have you been kind of lazy, or you get into bad habit patterns or whatever? So when we go to a program and it's a one-time deal, we learn some stuff and then we kind of go back to the way we used to do things. Well, then it really wasn't training. We didn't learn something new. We didn't practice something new. So when we talk about how can I do this differently, we have to form new habits. Hence, ongoing kinds of activities. So, depending on how you define education, awareness, training, some people would say it's a waste of time. I say we've got to spend time forming those new habits, having new understandings so that we can utilize those to our advantage. So, there's some research out there that talks about the modern brain. Okay. The modern brain thinks, it analyzes, it imagines, it's creative, it's innovative. And so some people would call it metacognition, which means we think about thinking. So when we take quiet time to think about scenario planning, so perfect example right now, having nothing to do with um, unconscious bias or our blind spots and discrimination, but think about COVID. Some of your organizations probably had emergency preparedness plans or some elements in place for floods, for earthquakes, for power outages, right? We had some scenarios that we planned, that we rolled out, that we thought about. We have some equipment, we have some tools, we have some supplies, we have training put in place. How many of you had anything about a pandemic, right? Probably not. So when we talk about thinking and analyzing, evaluating, that often is futuristic, right? And not everybody wants to live in the future. A lot of people are living here and now. And so it's what's here and now, what's going future, what did we learn from the past? Well, then the ancient brain, which kind of is one that reacts to situations. It's a pattern of recognition. It says, I understand what this is. I know what I'm supposed to do. And that's where our brains are between 70 and 80% of the time. We, to me, we react to a situation. And so we, uh, you, you don't like something that someone says and you get upset. Um, People have said to me, Deborah, that makes me angry. And I suggest to people, and I'm going to veer off just a second here so that you know that I'm veering off a little different path. Um, in my world, my teachings, my experience, anger is a second emotion. It's a secondary emotion, which would suggest that you were something first. So, what were you first? Confused, frustrated, embarrassed, worried? You could have a lot of emotions before you got to anger. So, when we think about the ancient brain reacting to things, and we're making thousands of choices and have things available to us each and every day, we react because we've got a pathway. We got a bad habit. This is the way we've always done it. Instead of stopping and saying, I need to think about that for a minute. How does that impact today, here, now? How will that impact the future? A lot of times when creating policies, we create it now for safety. We create it now because we have an issue or concern. What is that going to look like in the future? Is that going to help us down the road? Or are we just overreacting to a situation that we need to deal with now? So being thoughtful about the fact that our brains are constantly working on our behalf in some fashion or another. So when we talk about those mental models that we've kind of put in place, again, back to the element of driving on autopilot of sorts. If I take a step back for a moment to that earlier slide, some of you might be of a certain age group and you'll remember the Incredible Hulk. Anybody remember the big, huge green man, the Incredible Hulk? Well, he has no metacognition, right? He's all reactionary, right? And so when David would get upset about something and the adrenaline would pump, all of a sudden there he was. There's the Incredible Hulk, and he would take care of things. Um, he wasn't problem solving in the way most of us would want someone to. So, but then when things calmed down, kind of quote went back to normal. Well, I will tell you, if we have one of those blow ups, usually the modern brain should take over, and that's when we would say, "I apologize for what I said or what I did. I didn't know it would have that kind of impact." So our reasonable modern brain gets into um, back into sync where it should be. So when we talk about gathering information, right? So this is the slide that I'm showing you now. What we have is what we call mental models, where we're gathering data, and we're constantly gathering data, even if we're not always conscious of it. And then we again evaluating, judging, deciding, maybe too quickly, about something. So again, stereotypes can show up with what we're gathering, what we're used to, what we know. Where did we get that information? Who provided that information? Did we go and research that? Did we get that from other people? Did we form our own opinions, or are we sharing opinions of others? So what we need to do is get more mental models, ask more questions, research more, go out and experience things. When I was in high school, I had the opportunity because I was taking all the classes I was supposed to take my senior year. I had some time to kill. And back then, I don't know why, but I never thought about getting a job while I was a senior in high school and work while you're supposed to be in class. I mean, school time. I had an after school job that I worked evenings and weekends, but I never thought about, hey, I can end my class day a little bit early and go to work. So I did what we call independent study at that time. And I worked with Mr. Green, and I was into psychology, sociology was my major and my minor, got my teaching certificate. So, that's why I'm kind of sometimes heady, like some of this language. But one of the things that I remember is that I was really interested in religions versus cults. And way back when, some of you are probably even from the area, but you might remember the Bhagwan Shah Rajneesh, the Bhagwans, and the Rajneeshis, and in Antelope. And if you remember any of that, one of the things that I was intrigued was, why are people interested in this? What makes that so fascinating? And so for me, one of the things that I did is I went to, um, I visited Rajneeshpuram. I went out there to visit. I talked with the people. I read stuff. I watched stuff. I interacted. I didn't get to meet the Bhagwan in person, but I did get to see him multiple times during my visit. I got to listen to him. Um, that wasn't the only thing I did. I then had a friend who was Jewish, and I spent time going to synagogue. And I had a friend who was Catholic, and I spent time going to mass. And I was learning and trying to figure out what the differences were, putting myself in positions where I was uncomfortable, where I didn't know the rituals. I didn't understand the rituals. So when we talk about having this kind of insider versus outsider kind of mentality, there really is an element here of being able to say, okay, can I put myself in uncomfortable spots to learn about things differently, to see different perspectives, to understand what these examples teach me, what resonated with me, what didn't. What did I go, huh? Like words to a song. It could be a very similar song in a Methodist church and a Catholic church, but a couple of keywords are different. So being able to kind of expose yourself to different opportunities. When we talk about other elements of insider versus outsider mentality, um, you go to a conference, right? The SDO conference that either is at the coast or in Portland, or when we've gone to, we've been at Seaside, we've been in downtown Portland, we've been at Sun River, when we've even, I think maybe once in Bend at the River House. So when we go to those conferences and we enter an exhibit hall, we tend to, scientists have noticed, we tend to go to the right. Now, I don't know why, but we do. And we tend to pay attention to kind of what we call the T zone in a classroom, right the front row and down the middle. And if people really want to be focused on education and lean into something, they tend to sit there as opposed to sitting in the back row. So being able to be thoughtful about, we want to be on the insider kind of scenario versus outsider. And we set ourselves up to experience that on an ongoing basis. So expanding on that a little bit more, when we feel like we're excluded, when we feel like we don't fit in, when we feel like we're on the outside, that we're not part of the joke, right? All of those things, there is kind of in our brain, certain parts of it light up when we are excluded. And we call this social pain. Now, people have actually done studies on this where the people who participated knew they were in a study. The people knew what was coming next in terms of some actions or activities. And even though they knew this was an experiment, they still felt like there was an element of pain of being excluded. When we protect ourselves, we're actually, there's a couple thoughts going on in my head at the same time. When these experiments went on, they had physical pain as well as social pain when they were being excluded from a set of activities that were part of this experiment. And their brains were connected to circuits that were lighting up saying, I'm feeling uncomfortable, physical pain by being excluded from something. So the other thing that happens when we do this, when we're protecting ourselves, it's like we're multitasking. And so our brains are trying to do multiple things at the same time. And that's in the workplace too, which means we're being less efficient. We're trying to protect ourselves from situations. We're distracted by not being included. We're distracted by the fact that we don't fit in or it feels uncomfortable. And that's why a lot of people have talked about diversity and inclusion, that they really want to turn the vocabulary around. I mean, first of all, it was diversity. That was the first word that we had. Then we had diversity and inclusion. Then we threw in equity, and it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. People who are really focused on this really want to turn it around and say inclusion first, belonging first. So, what are you doing in your workplaces? If we talk about our unconscious bias is there and we need to kind of interrupt our brains for activities and we want to focus on things and we want to do things differently, what are you doing to purposely make sure that people feel like they belong, that they fit in? Okay, this is just a quote. I'm going to pass it just based on our experience of time. So, to my earlier point, that everyone has a story, everybody has a history, that we don't know everybody's journey, that we need to ask ourselves, what do I believe? Why do I believe? How did I get here? That we want to ask other people's questions. We want to be in critical inquiry of asking more, because on some respects, diversity really isn't our problem. It's being closed-minded. It's not getting outside your box and seeing and experiencing things, people, events, activities. And so there's the journey that, quote, they walk, and there's the journey that you walk. And we all have it, we all do it. And it doesn't mean that one is right and one is wrong. It just means we come from different places and we can agree that we come from different places. And being able to be thoughtful about being more curious, and that's that critical inquiry. The more curious I am, the more of a growth mindset that I have. And that gives us an opportunity to change the paradigm and to shift it. So, and a paradigm, when we talk about a cognitive framework, a paradigm includes our views, our opinions, our options, our beliefs, our values, things that we observe. It's all of those things in terms of our paradigm. So, how do we shift it? Being exposed to all those other things, in terms of being able to overcome racism. It's important to remember where are we making real progress? What am I personally doing to make progress? Where are people who have different paradigm shifts, different paradigms in general that I could expose myself to, that I could learn more about? And so when we talk about inside an organization and being an organizational leader, this is an opportunity to really build real trust with people, with all people, intentionally, purposely, every day. What are you doing to build trust, to build integrity with other individuals, all individuals? How is that messaging coming up in our workplace? So I think that it could come up in a couple of different ways in terms of all workers have the right to feel um, uh, comfortable in their workplace. Workers have the right to equal employment opportunities and activities, being free from discrimination and biases and prejudices. So when we talk about working with others and what's HR's role in this kind of capacity, so having people understand what unconscious bias is, when it happens, the way that it can impact our business, our organizations, our objectives, our districts, right? Training should highlight actionable steps that people can take, behaviors that could be challenged, saying, I'm not sure if that statement really would be accurate, being able to think about that more clearly, creating a workplace where employees are encouraged to speak up, to ask questions, to deal with some of those difficult topics, so that they're part of the discussion and not being excluded. When we talk about the overall impact that it might have inside your organization, and this is again perhaps being able to view it as inclusion and diversity, changing it around again for that basic human need of belonging. So we could build a culture inside our organization and our communities and all its activities that is more focused on belonging and being able to be thoughtful about what's our mission, what are our core values inside an organization, and how do we get rid of any of those barriers that might be in our way, so that we are thinking about the culture that we're building inside our workplace as a filter through which people process information, that we're influencing others on an ongoing basis in terms of values and actions and expectations, and that it really can impact how people will work and treat and connect with other people. So I would encourage you to think about recognizing that you have your own biases. So if we talk about your own personal steps, hard look in the mirror, recognizing that you have biases. What are those? Can you kind of dissect them? Where did they come from? How did they get formed? Where's that coming from? Um, which biases do you want to work on and address first? Look for common interests with other people who might also be interested in working on these things. Obviously, our goal is to get rid of those, um, form new habits, and be mindful that we don't fall back into old behaviors or old vocabulary. And it takes time to learn these things. It doesn't happen overnight, but what are you going to do? What goal? How are you going to remind yourself that you're working on these things? And so when we talk about opportunities to address it, become aware of individual perceptions and stereotypes. How are you making and why are you making those decisions? Where is all of that coming from? And not just yourself, but others as well, and asking questions. Do we have an opportunity to engage diverse cultures? People of different mindsets to come together. This is that phrase, more heads are better than one, right? So if we can get to know people, the real person, right? Perhaps a little bit under the mask, when we talk about learning about people's backgrounds, suspending judgments, taking things at face value and learning more, that diversity is a real thing, that it is complicated, that it's not just one thing. And again, conversation, 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 to challenge ourselves and to challenge our perceptions. We can do that in the workplace by how our job descriptions are written. We can do that in terms of our hiring process. What does our job announcement say? What's written there? When we're looking at a resume, what are we looking for? When we're talking about promotions, how do people get promoted? Fast forwarding on to that, when we talk about what HR can do, what business leaders can do, um, talking about the hiring process, what is our process now? What is it that we're trying to retain? What is the language that we're using? When we talk about building allies, people who are wanting to work on things too. The slides that follow talk about some ways that we can do some different I think about the hiring process as one of our activities and being able to make things a little bit different. And I'm going to skip one more slide here and give you some examples based on our amount of time. Building things together. When we think about the hiring process, reminders to ourselves, what are we looking for? When we think about the hiring process and looking at a resume and we have a reaction to a resume, why are we having that reaction? Where's that coming from? Are other people having reactions? When we talk about providing training, then before I start looking at resumes, before I start writing policies, what are the things that I need to pay attention to? So there are little reminders that we can put in place. When we talk about ERGs, if you're not familiar what that means, it's employee resource groups. If people gravitate towards people like themselves, this is a place where people feel a sense of belonging, but it shouldn't be exclusionary. It should be an opportunity to embrace more people. And I know some of your organizations are tiny, tiny, and others are larger. But the idea is, why do we want to have groups get together? What's the benefit of doing that? And instead of HR creating some kind of requirements around things, how about if groups of people came up with, how do we do this? How do we make it happen together? What are our ground rules together? So again, training is only as good as going to the gym, doing more of it, making it a habit, being consistent with it, making yourself stick to a process. And this was the example that I was referencing early in terms of first steps to an education and making something stick. If you watched a video for a couple of minutes before reviewing through a situation or writing a policy or reviewing through resumes, those things that remind you where your biases can pop up. So these are opportunities to make things stick. Reminders, cheat sheets, whatever you want to call it, but it's some kind of accountability system that you're putting in place for yourself to track the ways that you're going to be able to kind of make a difference. So one of the ways that we can also do this is choosing someone on the other side of an issue or a challenge or a concern, a position, and really sit down and talk and ask them questions. And here are the 4 questions that I want you to be thoughtful about. Anytime you find you're interrupting your brain and your thought process about what you're doing and how you're doing it and why you're doing it, you've got somebody who sees this differently than you do, is to be able to say, what in your life experience has led you to believe these things, right? On this particular topic, issue, concern. People get a chance then to share their story and how they got there. How did they get to where they are today on any one particular thing? Second question, what about the other person? What about the other person concerns you or frightens you or scares you? So what about the other position? What about the other person? What about is bothering you, that worries you, that frightens you, that scares you? Is there anything that you'd like to ask this person that you've never had a chance to ask someone from this group, of that position, of that standing before, that you would like to ask? Because now's the time. Now's a safe place, right? And obviously you have to feel comfortable doing that with this person. And is there anything that's an opportunity for cleanup? Is there anything there that's an opportunity to say, I've had an aha moment. I had no idea that that's where you were coming from. I had no idea that that was part of the consideration. I had no idea that that was so important to whomever. It could be to that person, but it could be to the cause or to the group. So those are 4 questions. Those are things I think you can take away and use. These are things you can use at home. It's not just about work. So hopefully you're going to have an opportunity that you can have these slides, right? So being able to commit to listening to other people, make sure that it's authentic conversation, practice asking questions. What do you see happening that I don't see? How do you think people are perceived in terms of our perceiving this? How am I coming across? How do you think that we're being perceived? Why do you feel there's a need to be doing this as opposed to that? What are we not doing that we should be doing? Help me understand. Please tell me more. You're an inquiry. You're authentic. You're being sincere. And that means you're making a commitment to invest in this process. And hopefully that makes not only you more productive, but it makes other people more productive as well. So be loud, be proud, stand up, share information, ask lots of questions, be involved in the process, so that we're striving for more effective, productive conversations with each other on a variety of levels. The more public you are about putting the organization's stance about anti-racism, anti-discrimination, embracing diversity, embracing inclusion, embracing belonging, the more that happens, the more successful organizations will be, you will be, the organization that you represent will be. Companies with a higher gender diversity, 15% more likely to outperform others. Racially diverse organizations and districts, 35% higher in terms of financial returns. And I know that that's not always kind of necessarily your guys' focus in terms of, I mean, you don't want to not make money. You don't want to necessarily break even. But for organizations that are highly diverse, they are more profitable in a variety of ways, which then profitability has different definitions. That's also comfort inside our communities. That is mental, physical health inside our organizations for people. Building trust and communities that rely on us is profitable. So all those things make a difference. All right, most of us believe that we are ethical and unbiased. We imagine we're good at decision making, able to be objective, size up candidates, be fair, be rational in our organizations, and have our best interest. For more than 2 decades, though, research confirms in reality that we fall short of that we have an inflated self-perception of goodness, of fairness, that we aren't biased. And the answer is we do have them. Now you need to find out what they are. So conduct a self-assessment. Honestly explore, be non-defensive and engage and investigate what we do, how we do it as an organization. Is it having backlash? Is it having implications that we don't want? Those are things that you can do so that we can strike a balance, and we have some new goals that we're striving for, raising awareness and being action oriented in our strategies, and be thoughtful. Where are your barriers personally, professionally, as a community, as an organization, as a district? Where are the barriers? And then what are we going to do about them? What can we do about them in that regards? All right. I went over a little bit. I know, I apologize. And I even went fast through some of those things. So now's an opportunity. Christian hopefully will facilitate this. Questions, just so that you know, there are more slides that have resources available to you. Different books, videos, materials that can be available to you. Websites that you can do some self-assessment. So I think it's like 12 or 14 slides that have different materials available to you for those who have an interest in wanting to learn more, push the envelope, take self-assessment, reflect in the mirror, as it were. So those are all there for you, for those of you who can download it or when it's sent to you, or however we're quite doing that. All right, Christian, do I have any questions?
I sent you 2 into the chat box if you want to look, but
My
not much.
apology, I didn't see those pop up. I got to find my little chat box. The little icon is not showing up or blinking.
Oh no.
I don't know why. Something went wrong. Where's my... Oh, let me do this. I can click. Okay. There we go. Let's see. Will you send out a citation for the article that makes financial case for the diverse. I can see where I pulled that from. In most cases, you'll notice that I did cite items or the person or the researcher. So let me see. It's probably in the it's probably not in my notes in the PowerPoint, but it might be in my notes in terms of my file folder. So I can take a look at that for you, Holly. Probably would be helpful on the best way to be able to reach out to you to get that to you. That is the only one that I see, Christian. So Christian,
Yes,
that's
that's
the only one
all
there
of
was? Okay.
2090.
All right. Well, there has to be more questions. Well, maybe in some respects, hopefully my hope for you is that there was something new there. My hope is that there's something that you can use, share. There's something we in the training arena call the learning curve. And the learning curve is if you don't share, review, talk about, go back and take a look at um, any of the materials, conversation, something that spurred, within less than 72 hours, it'll all be gone. So we call it the forgetting curve. So the more you look at it, the more you talk about it, the more it's top of mind awareness, the more it will stick with you and stick with others. So I would encourage you to do that. And of course, you always can. My information is on the front side. You always can give me a jingle. You can send me an email and ask questions. And that's separate from the program of services that HR Answers provides to SDAO members, but just in terms of this conversation. So by all means, please feel free. I welcome that. All right, well, I don't see any. Oh, do you have thoughts on how to achieve diversity in a recruitment? Any particular job, just jobs in general? One of the things that is be thoughtful about what are we doing now? So where are we? Where do we post? Um, where do we announce? So being thoughtful about that. A lot of times we might put things on NeoGov for districts. You might put things on your website, which is good. And so a pause there for a moment from a website standpoint. Does your website represent what you're looking for? So when we talk about achieving diversity for our organization in our recruitment activities, then does our website reflect who we want to be, who we are? When people go to, a lot of people go to websites, and side note, um, mobile applications. So if your website isn't mobile enabled so that people can see and experience everything on their handheld phone device, sometimes iPads and things like that too, you might want to think about that. And the reason I say that is because we're trying to get people in the moment. You're trying to get people who utilize that handheld device all the time to move to action. So think about that you want to make sure that it communicates well in that capacity. That also is in the moment, they're around other people, which means they'll share things. People will talk about things. So think about your website in terms of recruitment. Now, the other thing in terms of diversity is, so where are you posting and what's working for you? If you're posting places and it's not working, then if it's not working, why are we still doing it? Um, there are specific organizations that target groupings of people. So if you're looking for expanding people of color, then there are not-for-profits that will post job announcements. There are certain websites that will focus on that. So you have to think about where you're at now. A lot of people use Indeed as one of their job boards. Nothing wrong with Indeed. So, but it's not necessarily going to reach out to people of color who are Black or brown. If you are making assumptions about needing IT people and we're only going to certain colleges or certain programs, well, do we know anything about who their student base is? So you want to cast as wide a net as you possibly can. There are some I'm trying to think. In the HR space, there is a a person, her name is Jennifer Johnson, who has put together a place where people can post their jobs. And it's all across, probably more than anything else, the greater Portland area. She is in Oregon. She's also up in Washington, in terms of having sites that are focusing on those two states. There is an HR chapter of the Society for Human Resource Management that has 15 chapters in Washington, and I know not you guys aren't necessarily in Washington, and there are 7 chapters here in Oregon. And oftentimes those local chapters down in K Falls and Eugene, Portland, Salem, over at the coast, up in the Hood River area, there are websites that they have, and they'll allow you to post jobs. Obviously, their focus is not oftentimes HR. However, HR usually knows what they're looking for. So if people are seeing job postings places, if you do, I mean, Facebook is really working hard because of the social connection for a lot of referrals. If you think about employee referrals and utilizing that, LinkedIn is always a great place. It's a much more of a little bit professional, elevated element of recruitment. Um, and being able to think about, again, what are you using now? What's working? What's not working? Who are you trying to attract? And an example of something that happened, it's not the same kind of environment, so I'll put that up there up front. Cisco Software, down in California, went to its software engineers and said, when you're not working, when you're doing your own thing, kind of a hobby, what do you do? Where do you go? How do you spend your free time? And one of the things that they talked about is they really liked microbrews. So, and there was a couple of places in town where a great number of them apparently hung out. Well, that's where HR went and started recruiting people. Now, who would have thought that you were supposed to go to a brew pub and focus on recruiting from there? But they were like-minded kinds of people, and they attracted other software engineers from other organizations down in Silicon Valley. And so it was a way to get to people. So where do the people you're looking for kind of hang out? What is it that they do? And part of that also is, what is the job really? And in all sincerity, what is the job we're looking to have done? And what is a have to have versus kind of nice to haves, but they have to have this kind of certification, this kind of training, years of experience, versus what can you teach on the job? I think so much of our job, so many of our jobs are things that we can teach people. And so do that. You can't teach integrity. You can't teach positivity. You can reinforce those things. What is it that people already have that they bring to the table? And we're going to teach them how to do stuff. But those characteristics that we're looking for, that's what you're looking to duplicate. That's what you're reinforcing in terms of the values of the organization. So how do we get that? I can teach you how to do these things. I'm looking for people. So cast the widest net you can in terms of posting your job, and in fact even kind of post it as what is it, the kind of person you're looking for? Are you someone who likes a fast-paced environment, who likes to save the day and help others get things done? Are you someone who's detail oriented, who wants to make sure things look good before they go out so there's never any errors? That's what you're looking for in the job. But what we say is, can you write reports and review documents? And nobody finds that fun. But if you talk about the end result of the job and the outcomes of the jobs in your job postings, it actually is something that is more interesting to read, that captures people's attention and they want to read more, which is that call to action to follow through. Okay, that was more than you probably wanted. I apologize. I have lots of thoughts. So you also can use the state of Oregon as a resource. It doesn't cost you any additional dollars. You're already paying unemployment dollars through taxes. So use the employment department, which will post jobs, and it posts throughout the entire state. So at least then your net is cast statewide. And I don't know what your policies are, and maybe there are things you're discussing. COVID has taught us that you don't have to necessarily come into the office to do work. Now, I'm not suggesting that some of the positions must be present and in person, that some of your personnel are essential workers and you need them there. For jobs that don't have to be in the office, in the building proper, where can they come from? And then you don't have to, unless there's some policy in place, you don't have to have them in the four borders of Oregon. They can come from a variety of places, which means a wider net, more diversity coming from others. Just something to think about. Thank you for asking that question. And if that wasn't helpful, quote, enough or something else, will you let me know? There was a question, when we talk about bias and prejudice, when does it become a double standard? Ooh, okay. I probably need some clarification on that from the standpoint of, do you have something specific that you're referencing? When does it become a double standard? I double standard in terms of I'm trying to be more open-minded. I'm trying to do something and I'm misbehaving. I'm not okay, so reverse prejudice. Someone is chiming in that maybe I'm talking, could it be a quote, double standard in terms of reverse prejudice? So I'll just call it what I think that could then mean is that we are reaching out to so many people, but are we then discriminating against white people? Are we then discriminating against, if we're so focused on women, then are we discriminating against men? Okay, if that is a true, if that's where the question is kind of coming from, understandably, you have the right to say, hey, let's make sure that we're being thoughtful about this. And what I'm going to take you on a quick history journey from the standpoint of we had employers, I mean, eons ago, decades ago, who made some very poor choices about not hiring a person of color because they didn't like the color of their skin. And the law came along and said, that's not okay. You can't discriminate. And so we have put in, when I do my diversity training or when I do my harassment training, I have a whole slide on things that here are all the places where we cannot discriminate. Someone's physical ability, color of their skin, the religion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so one of the things that ends up happening is those came along because employers didn't hire someone, didn't promote somebody, fired someone because of, and so the law has stepped in and said, we cannot do this. Now, when you look at the list of who all is protected under don't discriminate, our biases, the prejudice, the discrimination kinds of stuff, every single one of us in some fashion or another is on that list, which then, quote unquote, by law, would suggest that we're all protected and that we're all covered. And that's kind of the official kind of observation. What I would suggest to you is truly, what is it we're doing? Why are we doing it? Why does it matter? How does it help? Are we hurting anyone? Are we disadvantaging anyone? Are we looking at this the right way? What is taking place? How is it taking place? When it comes to recruitment, here's the deal. If you have done as much as you possibly can to be as wide a net as you possibly can, and you don't have people of color applying for your jobs, you're going to hire the most qualified person. Absolutely. That's what we're trying to do. People who meet the qualifications. As an organization, we get to decide how wide that funnel is in our qualifications. The fewer qualifications you have, the more narrow that funnel is going to be. The fewer people are they going to meet all those qualifications. The wider it is from the standpoint, the more you put in terms of qualifications, I should rephrase that. Please forgive me. The wider your thing is, your funnel, and I don't even know if you can see me. Some of you are have cameras up or not. If you have a funnel and it's really wide, you can put all kinds of things in there, which means people have to meet all of those. The skinnier that it is, the fewer qualifications you have, that might actually limit more people being able to. So you either embrace more characteristics that you're looking for and you're looking for something specific. So you're kind of deciding how wide and skinny this is. That allows you to either open it up or to restrict it. And you have to decide that you know what you're doing and why you're doing what you're doing. If I was hiring for a therapist, obviously I need some credentialed individuals who meet the criteria for the position. If I'm hiring someone at the front desk to answer phones, I probably can be really open in terms of who can apply for that job. Because if it's answering phones, I can teach people how to answer phones. I cannot teach people to smile all the time. I can ask for it. I can make that part of our expectations. They have to decide they want to do it. And so you've got this element of what's negotiable versus non-negotiable. And so when it comes to reverse prejudice, you want to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And does it have any backlash? Is there something there that we weren't considering? And sometimes our decisions, our protocols, our policies, we might not have been as open or as embracing to looking at other sides of things or views as we could have been. We didn't invite the right people to the table, to the conversation, to prevent that from happening in the first place. So, yes, it's important to be thoughtful. We didn't get here because we were doing things the right way in the first place. And that's what got us to where we're at. And we're still having challenges with that today in a variety of areas. And even if we aren't talking about social injustice, all we have to do is look at the number of reports that have turned into official claims that get submitted to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, on average, 1 million a year that they pay attention to. That's not all the incidents that are happening. These are the ones that got reported to them that they paid attention to. 1 million a year. It's usually 900 and to 900,000, 600 and something, 700 and something. It's always high. That's happening on an annual basis and has been true for at least a decade. And so because of that, that tells us that we aren't where we need to be yet. That doesn't mean people aren't making progress. That doesn't mean we aren't doing better. It means we've still got work to be done. I think I sound like a soapbox. That was not my intent. But I am glad you guys are asking questions. Okay, I'm not sure I'm seeing anything else. But it does sound like I have that to do for Miss Holly. All right. No more questions?
Yeah, no other
Maybe
questions.
appropriate time to close this out?
If there are no other questions, we can absolutely. Well, okay. I'll give you a couple more seconds. If I don't see any more come in, it doesn't look like it. So in that case, I just want to thank everyone for coming today or joining us for today's webinar. Deborah, that was wonderful. Great job. If you do have any questions, of course, like we said before, please do email them either to memberservices@sdao.com, or you can email Deborah herself and she'll make sure to get back to you as soon as she can. In that case, though, this recording and slides will be up on our website under trainings, underneath the tab webinars, and you'll be able to find multiple HR regional trainings there, as well as their recordings. So with that being said, thank you for joining us once again, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.